Hello, and welcome to my channel, where I talk about consulting and how to get a consulting offer. In this video, I'll show you how to answer the questions in a consulting interview, with tips on case and behavioral questions. This is aimed at those who are looking to get into consulting and are either still studying or have just graduated. So a bit about me. I currently work as a consultant in London. I graduated last year with a degree in engineering. I didn't get a first at university. I had never done any consulting internships. In fact, I had only learnt what consulting was a few months before, but ended up getting several job offers from top consulting firms. I therefore have some experience on breaking into consulting from the outside, and I'd like to share with you the tips I learnt during researching consulting prep websites and participating in interviews, advice which would typically cost $250 to learn from a tutor. I offer this for free on the internet because there is a lot of conflicting information out there on what to do, and when you are looking into this world from the outside, it can be hard to know what is going on and who is correct. If you want more practice, I offer one-on-one tutoring, and there's a link in the description to find out more. But for now, let's dive into the interview process. I feel the case part of the interview is what worries people the most, but there are only a certain number of types of case question, and with good structure and practice, you can get through any. Let's tackle this first. The first thing you'll hear in a case interview is, our client is ... and they want ... The filler changes, but this is how they all go. This is called the problem statement. If you haven't done these interviews before, this is a very weird way to start because while you haven't yet been asked a question, you have to do two things. I think this throws a lot of people, and because it isn't instinctive, people often overthink what they do. So here is a step-by-step process to acing these two things. First, as the interviewer is talking, write down the key points you hear, specifically about the problem statement. Then, when the interviewer has stopped talking, say, "So just to summarize," and insert your answer, and then say, "Is that correct?" Make sure your summary is concise. Aim to have written down the 5 most important things you hear and repeat them. Think the name of the company, what they do, and what they want from the consultancy. This should be quick. You should start talking within about 5 seconds of the interviewer finishing. Then they should say, "Yes, that's correct. And this is the first part done. Well done." The second thing to do is ask clarifying questions before you move on to the main question. These are anything from, what time frame is the client looking at? What percentage increase in profits are desired? Even, what is this product or market about? I have absolutely no idea. Aim to stick to maybe 1 or 2. Clarifying questions are not for starting to solve the problem, so don't say, "The client wants to increase profit. Does this mean increase revenue or reduce cost?" You don't want to risk them saying, "Well, we'll work that out later." Again, this is to be done very quickly. If you can't think of a good question, don't say anything. If it's a yogurt business, it isn't really important to know at this stage what color the yogurt packets are, but it would be important to know if all they sell is yogurt, or if you misheard them and it's actually a yoga company. Finally, the interviewer will give you a starter question, usually, how should the client go about solving the problem? They could also ask a market sizing question, which we will cover later. This is the first timeout phase, again something strange and different to other interviews you might have done before. At this point, say, "Can I just take some time to gather my thoughts?" Try and limit this to a minute or less if you can. To solve the client's problem, you need to break it down into different sections so you can focus on each one, making the problem easier and ensuring you find the correct solution. This is a critical skill as a consultant, so demonstrating this in the interview is essential. This is what we refer to as MICE, mutually exclusive, collectively exhaustive. Split the problem into mini problems that different people can each solve, and together it will be completely solved. If you're cleaning a 3-bedroom house, and you have 3 people, it is easier and more efficient to send a person to each room rather than everyone cleaning the whole house, getting in each other's way, cleaning parts of the house that have already been cleaned, etc. To get the structure, use issue trees or frameworks. If you've researched consulting interviews before, you know there are seemingly infinite numbers of frameworks out there, and some people advise that you keep learning until every question fits into a framework, but I don't agree. You'll end up horseshoeing a deliberately difficult question into a ready-made framework that doesn't fit, and wonder why you only have 2 sections with content and 3 empty sections because it doesn't fit. Really, there are only 2 main ones to learn, and 2 general ones that are useful. The first is profitability. Profit is revenue minus costs. Revenue is the price of items multiplied by the number of items sold. Costs are split into fixed costs, such as rent, licenses, central staff salaries, and variable costs, materials, temporary worker salaries, etc. This is a famous one and will probably come up, so make sure you know how to split a profit question into these 4 sections. Next, mergers and acquisitions, or M&A. How large is the market and is it growing fast? How large is the firm and is it growing fast? Any synergies from joining, and any risks from joining. Next, business situation. Company, competitors, customers, and products. This is good for splitting things up, but remember that these all interact, so don't blindly use it. I would even suggest only using 3 out of the 4 at one time, as likely one won't be important and will give you more time to beef up the other paragraphs. Other than that, splitting points up into X and not X is good if you really can't think of anything else. Think internal versus external risks, qualitative versus quantitative benefits, short-term versus long-term issues, etc. If you're really stuck, try and answer the question by writing down bullet points that come to mind, and then see if you can group any together under a headline. This is a last resort option, as you could end up with no subsections, just thoughts. But on the other hand, once you have written down your ideas, a suitable set of headlines might become apparent. The worst thing you can do is panic and not write anything down, so as last resorts go, this isn't bad, but make sure you structure your points somehow. Keep the number of sections to 3 or 4. If you have too many, each one won't be developed, and the interviewer might think that it could be simplified from 5 to 6 sections into 3 to 4, losing you marks. Once you are ready, say, the client has asked us to solve this problem, ... To do this, we should look at the following areas, and then take 10 seconds to say the headlines of each section, and then explain your bullet points for each section. By giving the titles of each section, and giving this one-line answer before you go through each point, you bring the interviewer on board with your thinking, and they won't interrupt you. Other things to remember when answering this question are that when you are explaining your answer, don't say, I'm using the M&A framework, or in order to make this a messy issue tree, as it can come off as unprofessional. I also wouldn't spend time trying to memorize other ones, like Porter's 5 forces, or the 4P or 7P marketing mix. The interviewers will know that you're trying to force the question into a ready-made framework. They'll know this because you'll say all 7 sections at the start, but only have info for 3 out of the 7P titles. Finally, don't waffle. Try and speak clearly, but don't rush, and don't be afraid to just finish your sentence and say nothing more. If they ask you follow-up questions, you can say extra stuff there. If they don't, then you never needed to say it. Market sizing. Another question that can come early on in the case interview is a market sizing question. These take various forms. When the question specifically asks for a size of the market, the answer will be in dollars or pounds. But the question might be how many people do this job, or how many of these items are sold, where the answer will be unitless. Make sure you remember what the answer should be, as it is very easy to stop when you get to the number of something, and forget to multiply it by the price to get the market size. The first thing you must do with these questions is decide if your answer will be a top-down or bottom-up approach. The top-down is very common and goes from the total number of people to find the market provided to them. This is the classic, of the 8 million people in London, how many buy pizza? A bottom-up approach is usually less common and works by finding the number of businesses serving that market and using that to find the size of the market. In this case, it would be, how many shops in London sell pizza? The trick to knowing which one to do is that if it is hard to think of the percentage of a population for a certain market, don't do top-down, and instead estimate or ask for details on the supply side of the market. Since we are probably more likely to know how many people buy pizza than how many shops sell pizza, it makes sense to use a top-down approach to solve this particular problem. There are several vital rules to acing market sizing questions. First, remember that the UK population is 70 million people. This isn't completely accurate, but it will make your maths easier. Ask for precise figures on other locations like New York, London, etc. Second, make sure any estimates you pick are defensible. Give a reason for why you've chosen that number, don't just pick it out of thin air. Third, when you go from one assumption to the next, have a non-100% conversion rate. This means that to get from the 70 million people in the UK to the number buying pizza, don't assume that everyone wants to buy pizza. Fourth, keep your analysis simple. Estimating and rounding effectively make it much quicker to reach your answer for only a small loss in accuracy. Just think, when multiplying numbers with several digits, like 11 times 19, round it to 10 times 20, which takes a quarter of the time to calculate, but is less than 5% inaccurate. The more precise you get your answer, the longer it will take to calculate for diminishing increases in precision. So trying to be a human calculator is not a good strategy in consulting interviews. As well as this, there are lots of types of customers in a market with different buying preferences, or archetypes, but there is no point trying to count for them all. Some people will buy a lot of pizza, some only rarely. Instead, have a small number of customer types, otherwise your calculation takes too long. When you have reached an answer, show thoughtfulness by either highlighting how to improve the answer or how this answer is relevant to the client. To explain this better, I'd like to go through this question and show you how to and how not to do it. The left-hand side was taken from an online market sizing model answer for investment bankers, which might explain a lot, with a lot of faults. The right-hand side is how I would tackle the problem. Starting with the bad solution, first, you're supposed to assume that every station in London has 5 pizza restaurants around it. With roughly 400 stations in London, that gives 2,000 pizza restaurants. If each pizza takes 5 minutes to cook, each restaurant can provide 12 pizzas an hour. If these restaurants are open 12 hours a day, that's 144 pizzas a day in 2,000 pizza restaurants, or 288,000 pizzas total. The first problem is that we're pulling this 5 restaurant number out of thin air and using a weak proxy by attaching it to the number of stations, which we're also estimating. Is this just pizza shops? What about the restaurants that sell pizza and pasta? What about grocery stores that sell pizza? There's no defense for this figure, and there's no awareness of different archetypes of who might be buying these pizzas. In this case, you would need to estimate the number of restaurants and grocery stores, not just pizza shops. The other assumption that is not mentioned is the step involved in going from an individual pizza taking 5 minutes to cook to 12 pizzas being sold in an hour. This implies both that every pizza restaurant has an oven that can only fit 1 pizza at a time, and that these pizza restaurants are always busy and always serving customers from open to close. These assumptions are just plainly untrue. I've seen a lot of pizza ovens, and they can all fit multiple pizzas, and I've also seen pizza restaurants that aren't busy. If these pizza restaurants were constantly making pizzas, more pizza shops would probably open. So clearly this assumption isn't great. This is why I say to have a non-100% conversion rate. Even saying pizza shops will be busy 70% of the time makes more sense. Some won't be so busy. Some might not be open for 12 hours a day. Some might only open on the weekend, and some might only sell slices rather than full pizzas. You have to account for this, or at the very least, make it clear you are aware of this nuance. So to conclude, we have found this 288,000 figure with bad estimates, no awareness for different customer types, and no connecting logic. Please, please do not do this in an interview. A better way is to realize that calculating the number of pizza shops and grocery stores is quite hard, and that a top-down calculation is easier. So let's do that. There are 8 million people in London. You can always ask for this figure, as London could be Greater London, the City of London, etc. Note how showing you are aware of nuance by clarifying allows you to ask for this figure. You're not just asking blindly. Let's assume about 20% of people don't like pizza. Probably a reasonable estimate if you've ever been to a restaurant with friends. There's always a few people who don't like pizza and will have something else. You're left with 6.4 million people who do like pizza. Of these, some will eat pizza most days, Some only once a month, so a good estimate is once a week. And when they do, pizzas can be quite big, so typically a person will have half a pizza, which is the usual serving size on a pizza box. This accounts for both restaurants and shops. Once a week means 0.5 pizzas every 7 days. 6.4 million is roughly 6.3 million, which divides by 7 nicely to give 0.9 million half pizzas, or 0.45 million full pizzas per day. This is another point. 6.4 divided by 7 is actually 0.914, but you don't get much extra accuracy for that, and it will take you a lot longer to calculate, so it's a good idea to round here. Very quickly, using only two main estimates, we have arrived at this figure. We can then extend this answer by saying that in order to get a more accurate figure, we could suggest taking a survey of people to see how often they eat pizza, or see if one exists already. This helps your answer because you have not only developed a hypothesis, you have a very quick and easy way of checking your hypothesis, an important skill for a consultant. And so when I searched this up, I found a survey from the UK in 2019 showing that 14% of people eat pizza less than once a month, which we can neglect, and the other 86 eat pizza on average once every 15 days. As a result, we can adjust our numbers. 14% is almost 12.5% or 1/8. So 1 million people out of 8 million in London do not eat pizza or only eat it very rarely. Of the 7 million who do, they eat one pizza every 15 days. So our answer is 0.4 million per day, showing we were close and just had to adjust our final numbers. Another way we can extend our answer is to bring it back to the problem statement. In this case, we haven't been given one, but the most likely one would be, your client is a pizza restaurant looking to start in London. Does this make financial sense? If so, we would take our answer of 0.4 million pizzas per day, multiply by 365 days, or 350 as it's easier, to give 140 million pizzas per year. With a pizza costing on average £10, this is a market worth £1.4 billion annually. That is an attractive market, and so at this point we might say, based off this calculation, this market is large and worth investigating further, although we need more information to see how fast it is growing, or if it is saturated with competitors and would be hard to gain share. This leads us on to the next question you might see, when you're given information and have to interpret it to see how it affects your hypothesis. When you're given data, it can take many different forms. It can be a graph, a table, or a collection of different figures. It's important you can understand these under time pressure, i.e., understanding the difference between frequency tables and cumulative frequency tables. Some stuff you might not have seen, and that's okay. Take some time out to analyze the info and come to a conclusion, asking clarifying questions if you need. The main things to remember here are not to blindly trust the data. Sometimes you might see pages and pages of irrelevant data, and you have to quickly sort through to find the relevant piece. Sometimes it might be a trap designed to trick you into saying it supports the conclusions we have when it doesn't, in which case it's valid to say that this info doesn't help us reach a conclusion. With these, ask for some time to gather your thoughts. Bring it back to the client's question. How does this data support the hypothesis at the start of the interview? Usually, the final question in a case interview will be to summarize the argument. In this case, there is a set script to follow of 4 points. First, repeat the main question, then give the solution from the hypothesis, then give evidence for this, usually quoting a key piece of info from any of the figures you've seen or your answer to the market sizing question if there was one. Finally, offer any next steps, if there are any logical ones, such as extending the market size analysis, or if there aren't, request information on areas that you weren't so sure about. The best way to prepare for this is to have underlined a few important figures and words throughout, such as the problem statement, the main hypothesis, and 2 or 3 pieces of info from other questions. Doing this basically means you don't need a pause at all, and you can sort of read off a script, which will impress the interviewers. Finally, make sure you give a clear, defensible recommendation. Highlight issues if they are significant, but just say the next steps would be ensuring a good strategy to target this. Don't make it seem like you're unsure. The client wants an answer. They don't want someone humming and hawing and sitting on the fence. In my experience, some general rules to remember for the case part of the interview are: on later questions, try not to always ask for a minute to gather your thoughts. You won't get to the end of the case if so, and then even if your answers are good, you won't have enough points to secure an offer. If you have a good answer that is structured and you're giving a clear conclusion to what you're saying, just say it. On timing, even if you're not pausing, take a deep breath and wait before giving each answer. This calms you down and stops you speaking faster and faster about less relevant points. Be prepared for pushback from your interviewer, even if you think your answer is right. If your answer to a market sizing question is good, they might then ask which number is most likely to be wrong, or what you would do to extend the analysis. I think it is easier to face this if you know it will happen, so assume they will push you on every point that you make. Remember, they're not looking for the right answer, but instead the right way of thinking, so by arguing with you, that's how they find out. Also, if the interview is virtual, don't use a calculator if they say not to, which they usually do. They want to see how good your mental maths is, and they also want to see you use suitable approximations. Using a calculator means they can't see this. They'll also know if you're using one if they either hear the clicks of the buttons or you say 365 times 1879 rounds to 686,000 without saying which figures you've decided to approximate to what. Also, try to insert the words "our client" into what you're saying when you can. It shows that you are remembering the main point of the question and it makes you look professional. Finally, don't be afraid to throw some interesting ideas in at the end, even if just throwaway considerations or arguments. Interviewers have probably heard 10 people answer the same question as you that day, and they're going to hear the same right answer a lot. So if you have anything extra that they haven't heard of before, chuck it in at the end. In our pizza question, you could maybe say at the end, "I've eaten a lot of pizza, and while I think we can neglect calzones and dessert pizzas from our calculation, a lot of places sell garlic bread as a pizza option, even if people order it as a side. We should probably include this in a future calculation." And that's how to ace the case part of the consulting interview. Now on to the fit or behavioral part. The fit part of the interview. I feel people neglect to prepare for this, as it often seems like it's just the icebreaker before a case, but it's actually favoured in later rounds once interviewers have determined that you can do cases, and it's the place where you can really stand out. Some firms, like McKinsey, really lean on this part, and will often spend 10 to 20 minutes on a single question. Typically, the first question will be an introduction of yourself. When answering this, run through the salient points of your CV, the first line of each of your sections, such as where you currently study or work, what your favorite modules are or what your working experience has been, your most recent internship, your most recent extracurricular achievement, and your favorite hobby. Should probably take you 30 seconds. They might or might not have access to your CV. If they do, sometimes they'll have questions about it and may ask you on anything that you've mentioned. So if you wrote about work experience on a particle accelerator, it's important to be able to explain everything you did and to know how a particle accelerator works. This isn't the part to stand out, this is the part to not slip up. Next, you will probably be asked as to your interests in consulting, that particular firm, or your motivations generally. Be able to answer all 4 of these questions on the screen, but especially prepare the first 2 as they are the most common. It's important to remember that consulting is about solving hard, interesting problems across a wide range of industries, so make sure interest for this type of work is apparent in your answer. In my case, I use the fact that engineering is about solving problems to explain that consulting was a natural career for me. Try and do the same with your degree, or your internships, or even your hobbies. Whatever you say though, don't mention money. Everyone knows consulting is a high-paying job, but there are lots of careers where you can make money, so it isn't enough of a motivator. For why this firm, again, don't mention the money, but mention something specific to the firm. Maybe you met someone who works there before the interview and they said something about how the company operates that you can talk about and praise. Maybe there are videos on the company's website discussing the culture that you can tell the interviewer. Even general points like, it's a small company, so there's lots of opportunity to learn, Or, it's a big company, so there are lots of opportunities to see different areas. Show you're aware of why the firm is different to others. Try and find something unique, as it is maybe the only part of the interview where the interviewer will feel good about themselves if you say something genuinely nice about the place. Next, you'll probably get a "tell me about a time when" question. These questions are the hardest to prepare for, but they're also where you can really shine, as you can give answers no one else has ever given before. You'll be asked to mention a story where you showed a particular quality or dealt with a particular problem. There are two things to remember when answering these behavioral type questions. First, start by giving a one-line overview of the answer. I showed this quality when I did this thing in this situation, and it had this effect. This avoids spending too long on context and will stop the interviewer from interrupting you to get to the point. McKinsey are very fond of doing this. The second is to focus on your actions and their effects, not other people's. So never say we, only I. If you can quantify the effect you had, even better, i.e., if you doubled team performance or funding for your society, say that, don't just say it got better. Finally, if it seems suitable, add what you learned from the situation. Preparing for these is extremely important. You have to be able to recall a lot of detail and potentially speak for 10 minutes. However, as you may be already thinking, memorizing and perfecting the answer is easy once you have it. The hard part is finding these stories, so here is how to. The first thing to realize with amazing stories is that the context through which they occurred does not matter, only the seriousness of the issue and the effect of your actions. Saying, I did this prestigious internship, only shows you could get in. It doesn't show you actually learned anything from it. So as far as the interviewer is concerned, you've just showed them that you have the same experience as when you started that internship. So why would you even bother bringing it up if that's all you would say? Don't just say how you got that internship, but what you learned through it and how you're now 1,000,000 times better than before. This means that you don't need prestigious internships at all to have good stories. My best story about integrity came from a coursework project with 2 friends in university, not from anything I was chosen for or got a prize for. So start thinking about general life experiences. Remember, I didn't do any consulting internships, but I still got an offer, so clearly life experiences are good enough. Any story where you created a positive change is what they want to see. Think of any example you have in the last few years of you doing something that showed these. Start by thinking about internships or projects you have done, as those are the times where you're most likely going to have shown these qualities, but also think about extracurricular events or any examples where you worked with other people. But what should you be trying to think of? They could ask questions about anything, right? Well, actually no. There are a finite number of questions they can ask, and an even smaller number of likely ones, so it's actually very possible to prepare for all of them, and I've come up with a list. Here are the 20 characteristics you are most likely going to be asked to show examples for. First is leadership. Have you ever led a group of people through a challenge? Bonus points if you weren't the designated leader but took charge, even for just a brief time. Entrepreneurial drive. Have you ever worked in a challenging environment outside of your comfort zone to achieve something? Problem-solving skills. What are the biggest problems you have ever worked on, and how did you approach or solve them? Persuasion. Have you ever had to change someone's mind? Bonus points if they are more senior than you. Innovation. Did you ever do something unusual to get the job done faster? Adaptability. Have you ever been able to quickly capitalize on a bad situation and make it better? Communication. Have you ever had to work with someone across a language barrier, or work with people in an area you don't understand to try and achieve a common goal? Consulting is about discovering an industry and 3 weeks later being enough of an expert in it to make billion-dollar recommendations to people who have worked in that field all their lives. Accountability. Have you ever admitted when you have done something wrong? Integrity. Have you ever done something hard even when no one would know if you didn't? Resilience. Have you ever had to convince yourself not to give up on something that seems daunting? Time pressure. What times have you had a strict deadline that you are in danger of missing, and how did you make that deadline? Team conflict. Have you ever disagreed with a teammate? Personal conflict. Have you ever disagreed with a manager? Creativity. You have to be able to make nice-looking slides to visually explain your point as a consultant and to tell the client a story. Have you ever made a video or a poster for university that people enjoyed and learned from? Presentation. Have you ever delivered a good presentation or spoke publicly? Biggest success. This can be academic or it can be a personal or professional success. Did you ever win a prize at university or fix something for a family member? Biggest failure. Say why it will never occur again or what you're doing to actively target it. 3 strengths. Make sure these align with the strengths needed in consulting. So aim for the first 4 characteristics on this page. 3 weaknesses. Again, mention how you are targeting them. Hard intellectual problem. Have you ever done a project of work that took several days or weeks to do? An example here is if you ever had to do an extended essay or a research project in school or university. For the ones in bold, these are most likely to come up, so prepare for 2 of these. Everything else, if you can think of several, that's great, but make sure you have at least 1. You will have examples. As I said, some of my best examples came from a coursework lab, and not even the most successful one from my first year of university. Think, did you ever have to take charge leading a group of friends around a city or motivate your classmates to finish a presentation? Finally, the ultimate trick, embellishment. Don't lie, but remember your actions were probably more significant than you thought, so don't undersell them. Don't be afraid to say what you think would have happened if you hadn't been there, and why. I like to mention how I stopped a technical argument in one of my coursework projects between 2 people. Someone else might have stepped in, but who knows when they would have done, and who knows if they would have been able to stop the argument as quickly as I did. At the end of the day, I was the only one who fixed that problem, which makes it sound that much more impressive. Some tips for these behavioral type questions. First, stop thinking about fancy titles. People say they have no good stories, but they're only ever thinking about titles. You can lead without being the leader. You can solve a problem that's outside of an official competition. Think, you're not going to get a prize for convincing your manager to give you a raise, but that doesn't mean it's any less impressive than winning a debating competition. Also, try and keep to the last 2 years so it looks like you're constantly demonstrating desirable consulting skills. So don't mention that you won the year 1 egg and spoon race, even though I did. Other than that, try and prepare 2 stories for the common questions, which you can repeat between rounds but not within rounds. Once you know the story, you'll know what to say. You won't sound stilted and you won't waffle because you have a script, so practice saying it. In my last interview, I was so ready that when I was asked a question, I actually had to pretend to think and pause for 2 seconds so that it looked like I'd just thought about it. That's when you know you have it. Once it's in your head too, you'll be able to slightly emphasize different aspects of the story to fit different qualities depending on the question. Finally, don't talk for too long. The interviewer might guide you, but remember, once you've answered the question, stop talking and let them move on to the next question, otherwise you won't finish. And there you are, the fit part of the interview sorted. I hope this was useful, and thank you for watching this far. I offer one-on-one tutoring on all areas of consulting applications, so please reach out by following the link in the description if you want to find out more. Thanks for watching, and please write anything in the comments that you want me to go over next.